night was a void, an absence so profound it felt like a living thing pressing against the thin nylon walls of my tent. I jolted awake, my sleeping bag rustling beneath me, the sound unnaturally loud in the oppressive stillness of Black Ridge. It was May 17th, 2:43 a.m., and the forest surrounding Tower 5, a remote fire lookout perched in the rugged mountains of the Pacific Northwest, had gone unnaturally quiet. No crickets chirped, no owls called, no wind whispered through the pines. It was as if the world held its breath, waiting for something to emerge from the shadows. My heart thudded in my chest, a primal rhythm that echoed the unease creeping up my spine. I sat up, my breath fogging in the chilly air despite the mild spring night, and fumbled for my flashlight, its cold metal a small comfort in my trembling hands. Then I heard it, a slow, deliberate sound that sent ice through my veins. The zipper of my tent flap inching upward, tooth by tooth, with a precision that spoke of intent. My fingers found the flashlight switch, and a beam of pale light cut through the darkness, illuminating the tent flap as the zipper continued its ascent. There was no hand, no visible force pulling it, just the relentless climb of the metal tab, as if guided by an unseen will. "Who's there?" I called, my voice steadier than I felt, though it trembled at the edges, betraying the fear knotting my stomach. The zipper reached the top, and the flap fell open with a soft thud, revealing a figure standing just outside, silhouetted against the starless night. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its proportions distorted in ways that defied nature, its edges blurred as if it were dissolving into the darkness. I swung the flashlight up, the beam catching its face, and my breath caught in my throat. Paul Lee. But Paul had vanished 3 weeks before I arrived. His disappearance chalked up to a hiking accident, a common enough fate in these unforgiving mountains. I was his replacement, Roger Johnson, halfway through my second month at Tower 5, a solitary assignment that had already begun to wear on my nerves. Yet here he stood, or something wearing his face, his features hollowed out, his eyes sunken pits that reflected no light. "Roger," the figure said, its voice a hollow echo, as if spoken from the depths of a cavern, each syllable dripping with an unnatural chill. "Join us in Tower 5. We are cold, Roger. So cold." I scrambled backward, my sleeping bag tangling around my legs like a predator's snare, my mind racing to reconcile the impossibility before me. "You're not Paul," I spat, my voice cracking as I kicked free of the fabric, my hands groping for the emergency flare in my pack. The thing tilted its head at an angle no human neck could achieve, a grotesque parody of curiosity, and the distance between us seemed to shrink without it moving a step. Its outline wavered, like ink bleeding into water, and I shouted into the night, "Daniel! Daniel!" My voice echoed off the looming structure of Tower 5, its skeletal frame barely visible against the darkened sky, where my partner Daniel slept, or so I hoped. The figure didn't advance, but its presence grew heavier, the air thickening with a palpable dread. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it retreated, not walking but flowing, its movements liquid and wrong, passing through the branches of the surrounding pines without disturbing a single needle. It melted into the tree line, leaving behind a void that felt more menacing than its presence. A light flickered on above, and Daniel appeared at the tower's railing, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Roger, what's going on?" he called, his voice tight with concern. I kept my eyes fixed on the spot where the thing had vanished, my mind scrambling for a lie that wouldn't make me sound unhinged. "Thought I saw a bear," I shouted back, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "Just checking the perimeter now." "Need help?" Daniel asked, his silhouette tense against the tower's railing. "No, go back to sleep." "Sorry for the noise," I replied, forcing a calm I didn't feel. He hesitated, then nodded, his light disappearing as he retreated inside. I zipped my tent closed, wedging my pack against the flap as a makeshift barrier, though I knew it would do little against whatever I'd just seen. Sleep was a distant dream now, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. I pulled out my digital recorder, a habit from my years as a fire lookout to document the mundane details of my shifts. and pressed record. May 17th, 2:43 a.m. Possible encounter. I began, my voice shaking as I struggled to find words that wouldn't sound insane. Figure observed outside tent resembled Paul Lee. Spoke with his voice. Movement patterns inconsistent with human physiology. I stopped the recording, my hands trembling, and then remembered something. Earlier that evening, I'd left the recorder running while I made dinner, capturing the ambient sounds of the forest for my personal log. A habit born from a love of nature's symphony. I rewound the file and pressed play, turning the volume up, expecting to hear the familiar crackle of my camp stove, the clink of my mess kit. At first, it was just that. The mundane sounds of my routine, the hiss of the stove, the rustle of leaves. But then, beneath it all, I heard them. Whispers, multiple voices overlapping, speaking my name in a chilling chorus. Roger, Roger Johnson. The voices were faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. A cacophony of tones that hadn't been there when I was cooking. I yanked the earbuds out, my heart pounding, the forest silence now a suffocating weight. I spent the rest of the night with my back against a tree, flashlight in one hand, knife in the other, the beam of light a frail shield against the darkness. The forest remained silent, but the sensation of being watched never left, a primal instinct that kept my eyes darting to the shadows just beyond the circle of light. As dawn broke, gray light filtering through the trees, I made my decision. Whatever was happening here, I couldn't face it alone, and I couldn't leave Daniel behind to deal with it either. I packed my gear with trembling hands, my mind racing through possibilities. Paul's disappearance had been written off as an accident. But what if it wasn't? What if whatever had taken him was still here, waiting? The radio had been spotty for days, a common issue in these remote mountains where signals struggled to penetrate the dense forest and rugged terrain. But that morning, as I stood in the clearing below Tower 5, the signal came through crystal clear, as if the forest itself wanted me to make the call. Tower 5 to headquarters, come in, I said, my voice steady despite the exhaustion weighing on my limbs. The response was immediate. Go ahead, Tower 5. I took a deep breath, the lie coming easily. Requesting immediate pickup and replacement. Equipment malfunction. They wouldn't send help for ghost stories, but broken equipment was another matter. A tangible problem that demanded action. Copy that. Earliest availability is tomorrow morning. Can you confirm nature of malfunction? The voice crackled through the radio. Power system failure. Backup generator also compromised. I replied, another lie, but one that would get results. Understood. Helicopter scheduled for 0800 tomorrow. Confirm receipt. Confirmed. Tower 5 out, I said, my eyes drifting to the tower where Daniel would be starting his morning routine, unaware of the nightmare I just endured. I had to convince him to leave with me to uncover what had happened to Paul, because whatever that thing was, it wasn't finished. It knew my name, and that knowledge felt like a noose tightening around my neck. I climbed the rickety stairs to Tower 5, the structure groaning under my weight, its weathered wood and rusted metal a testament to decades of neglect. The tower stood on Black Ridge, a jagged outcrop in the Pacific Northwest's vast wilderness, its isolation both a strategic advantage for spotting wildfires and a curse for those stationed here. Inside, the air was stale, the scent of old wood and mildew mingling with the faint tang of metal. Daniel stood by the filing cabinet, arms crossed, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a swarm of angry insects. He looked up as I entered, his expression a mix of curiosity and skepticism. You think I'm crazy? I asked, setting my pack down with a heavy thud, the weight of the night's events pressing down on me. I think you're sleep-deprived and stressed, Daniel replied, uncrossing his arms, his tone measured but not unkind. We both are. 2 months in that tower would make anyone jumpy. He wasn't wrong. Tower 5 had a way of fraying nerves, its isolation seeping into your bones, the endless expanse of forest a constant reminder of how alone you truly were. But this wasn't just stress, and I needed him to believe me. I pulled out my laptop, setting it on the desk between us, its screen casting a pale glow in the dim room. "I saw Paul Lee outside my tent," I said, my voice low, the words heavy with the weight of truth. "The same Paul who disappeared 3 weeks before I arrived. People don't just disappear and then show up as what? Ghosts." Daniel's expression softened, though doubt lingered in his eyes. "I don't know what it was," I admitted, rubbing my eyes, the exhaustion making my vision blur. "But it wasn't just Paul. There's something out there, something that's been watching us, following us." I saw the flicker of recognition in his gaze, the memory of his own unease on the East Ridge Trail, where he'd felt an unseen presence trailing him, the cold spots around the tower he'd dismissed as wind, the whispers he'd attributed to the forest's natural sounds. "Just listen," I said, pulling out my digital recorder and pressing play. The familiar sounds of my camp filled the room. The hiss of the stove, the clink of my mess kit, followed by the whispers, growing clearer with each repetition of my name. Then Paul's hollow voice cut through, a chilling echo. "Join us in Tower 5. Daniel's face drained of color, his voice barely above a whisper. "What the hell is that?" he asked, leaning closer, his skepticism crumbling. "There's more," I said, opening my laptop and logging into the Forest Service database with my supervisor credentials. I'd accessed sealed records that morning, files I wasn't supposed to see, and what I'd found had turned my blood to ice. "Tower 5 has been rebuilt 3 times since 1932, I said, turning the screen toward him, the document stark against the glowing background. Each reconstruction followed unexplained disappearances. 27 people, Daniel, all marked as presumed wilderness accidents. He pulled a chair closer, his eyes scanning the files, the weight of the numbers sinking in. "How many?" he asked, his voice tight. 27, I repeated, clicking through to the personnel files. "Look at the signature on these reports." He leaned in, his breath catching as he read the name. "Valeria Martinez, our current district supervisor. She's been signing off on these for years," he said, sitting back, running a hand through his hair. "This is insane, criminal, both. Why would she keep sending people there if she knew?" I shook my head, the question haunting me as much as it did him. "That's what we need to find out," I said, reaching for the phone on my desk and dialing Valeria's extension. After a brief exchange with her assistant, who claimed she was unavailable all afternoon, Daniel hung up, his expression darkening. I pulled up the security footage from the records room on my laptop, a hunch guiding my actions. "Look at this," I said, pointing to the screen. Valeria had entered the records room 15 minutes after I accessed the Tower 5 files. Her movements hurried, her face tense. "She knows something," Daniel said, his eyes narrowing. "And she knows we know." We worked quickly, downloading and printing key documents. A paper trail of disappearances, incident reports, and reconstruction orders spanning nearly a century. The printer hummed steadily, spitting out page after page of evidence that the Forest Service had buried. "What about Paul's personal effects?" Daniel asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the mechanical drone. "Did they ever release them to his family?" I paused, the question sparking a memory. "They're still in evidence," I said. "His family lives overseas. There's been a delay in processing." 20 minutes later, we stood in the evidence room, the clerk eyeing us with suspicion, but unable to refuse my supervisor credentials. She handed over a sealed box containing everything Paul had on him when he was assigned to Tower 5. Back in my office, we spread the contents across my desk. A wallet, keys, a phone with a dead battery, a notebook filled with wildlife observations. Nothing unusual at first glance, until Daniel picked up the wallet, his fingers probing a small tear in the lining. "There's something stuck in here," he said, working a tiny USB drive free, no bigger than a thumbnail. "Smart," I muttered. He hid it where no one would look. I plugged the drive into my laptop, revealing a single video file dated 3 days before Paul's disappearance. We huddled around the screen as I pressed play, Paul's face filling the frame, lit by the harsh glow of his headlamp in the darkness of Tower 5. He looked exhausted, his eyes darting nervously to something off camera, his voice a strained whisper. Day 47 at Tower 5, he began, his breath visible in the cold air. It's getting closer. I can hear it moving around the tower at night. He paused, listening, the audio picking up nothing but the creak of the tower in the wind. I've been documenting the patterns, he continued. It's most active between 2 and 4 a.m. It mimics voices, people I know, my family. But there's always something wrong with the sound, like it's coming from underwater. Paul looked over his shoulder suddenly, the camera shaking as he panned across the empty room. I know you're there, he said, his voice trembling. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, in the darkest corner of the room, a shadow moved, darker than the surrounding blackness, flowing like liquid smoke. As it came closer, it took on a humanoid shape, its outline blurred and wrong, just like the figure I'd seen outside my tent. Oh God, Paul whispered, the camera shaking in his hands. The figure stopped just at the edge of the headlamp's beam, and then it spoke, its voice a chorus of overlapping whispers. Paul Lee, join us. The video ended abruptly, leaving Daniel and me in stunned silence. We need to talk to Valeria now, Daniel said finally, his voice hoarse. I nodded, ejecting the USB drive and slipping it into my pocket. Tomorrow morning, first thing, I said, looking at the pile of documents we'd gathered, evidence of decades of cover-ups and disappearances. Tonight, we figure out exactly what we're dealing with. The next morning, I stood outside Valeria's office at the Forest Service headquarters in Portland, my pulse racing as her assistant waved me through without a word, her eyes fixed on her computer screen as if afraid to meet my gaze. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, the air conditioning humming too loudly in the silence. Valeria sat behind her desk, hands folded on top of a manila folder, the morning light through the blinds cutting across her face in thin, sharp stripes. You wanted to see me? I asked, keeping my voice neutral, though my nerves were frayed from a sleepless night spent poring over the documents we'd gathered. Close the door, Roger, she said, her tone measured but tight, a thread of tension running beneath her calm exterior. I did as she asked, standing there as she continued, her words clipped. You accessed classified files yesterday, files related to Tower 5. Care to explain why? I crossed to her desk and set my phone down, the video queued up and ready. I'd rather show you, I said, hitting play. Paul's face filled the screen, his pale features stark in the headlamp's glow, his voice trembling as he documented the entity's approach. I watched Valeria instead of the video, catching the exact moment her composure broke when the shadow moved toward Paul, her fingers gripping each other until her knuckles turned white. When the voices started, her expression fractured, a flicker of fear breaking through her professional mask. When the video ended, she sat perfectly still, her voice barely above a whisper. How much do you know? She asked, just as a knock at the door interrupted us. Daniel stepped in without waiting for permission, closing the door firmly behind him. Sorry I'm late, he said, his tone devoid of apology. Traffic. Valeria's eyes flicked between us, a resigned sigh escaping her lips. I see you've both decided to involve yourselves in matters beyond your clearance level. People are dying, Daniel said, taking the chair next to mine, his voice sharp with anger. Paul Lee died, and you knew it would happen. That's not... Valeria began, but I cut her off, my patience fraying. We found the records. 27 people since 1932, all at Tower 5, all signed off by you or your predecessors. She stood and walked to her window, adjusting the blinds to block the direct sunlight, her movements deliberate, as if buying time. What exactly do you think is happening at Tower 5, Roger? She asked, turning back to face us. Something's there, I said, my voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. Something that takes people, and the Forest Service knows about it. Her tone sharpened, a defensive edge creeping in. And you believe this based on what? A video that could be doctored? Old reports of people who went missing in one of the most remote wilderness areas in the state. We heard it, Daniel said, his voice low and firm. We saw it. Did you? Valeria countered, her skepticism a thin veneer over her growing unease. Or did you see shadows in the woods and hear wind through the trees? This job isolates people, makes them imagine things. I leaned forward, my frustration boiling over. Stop. Just stop. We know, Valeria. We know about the rebuilds after each disappearance. We know about the pattern. What we don't know is why you keep sending people there. For 30 minutes, she deflected, questioning our mental state, suggesting stress-induced hallucinations, reminding us of our professional obligations. But with each denial, her voice grew less certain, her composure cracking under the weight of our evidence. Finally, Daniel slammed his hand on her desk, his patience snapping. Enough! Either tell us the truth, or we take everything we have to the regional director. Valeria's confidence finally gave way, her shoulders slumping as she walked to her office door and locked it. She returned to her chair, her voice low, almost a whisper. Tower 5 stands on Black Ridge, she began. In 1932, during the Great Cascade Burn, 11 firefighters were trapped on that ridge. They built a makeshift fire tower there to coordinate evacuation efforts. I nodded, the history familiar from public records. What isn't public is what happened next, she continued, opening her desk drawer and pulling out a yellowed log book, its pages brittle with age. Radio transcripts from the team, the last 3 days of communication. She pushed it across the desk, and I opened it carefully, the binding cracking under my touch. The entries started normally. Coordinates, fire movement, wind direction. But on day 4, the tone shifted, the handwriting growing messier with each line. 0400. Something moving in smoke. Not fire crew. Too tall. 0430. Knocking sounds from north side of tower. No one there when checked. 0600. Voices calling from tree line. Names of dead men. Cannot be real. The final entry, dated 0200 the next day, was barely legible. It's inside now. It wears their faces. God help us. I handed the logbook to Daniel, whose face darkened as he read, the words painting a picture of terror that mirrored my own experience. The official report says they died in the fire, Valeria said, her voice steady but her eyes haunted. But no bodies were ever recovered. When the Forest Service rebuilt Tower 5 in 1934, they found the original structure intact. The fire had burned right up to its base, then stopped. And the indigenous warnings? I asked, recalling a mention in the files. She nodded, her expression grim. Local tribes stayed away from Black Ridge long before Europeans arrived. In their language, they called it the thin place, a spot where things could come through from somewhere else. So the Forest Service knew, Daniel said, his voice tight with anger. And they kept rebuilding, kept sending people there. Valeria's response was rote, as if she'd recited it 1,000 times. The location provides crucial coverage for wildfire detection in that sector. We tried remote cameras in the 90s, but they malfunction within days. Equipment fails there, always has. So you sacrifice people instead. Daniel snapped, his voice rising. It's not like that, Valeria retorted, then caught herself, her tone softening. It's complicated. The pattern suggested it only claims someone every few years. We implemented protocols, 2-person teams, regular check-ins, until budget cuts forced us back to single lookouts. Paul knew the risks, she added quietly, but Daniel wasn't having it. There was nothing in our briefing about this, he said, standing, his hands clenched into fists. Not explicitly, no, Valeria admitted, looking down at her hands. But the warning signs are there for those who pay attention, the isolation protocols, the emergency evacuation procedures specific to Tower 5. I met her gaze, seeing the guilt behind her professional facade. You never thought it would take Paul, I said, the realization dawning. She looked at me, her eyes heavy with regret. No, he was experienced, careful. When he reported the first anomalies, we were already arranging his extraction. But it moved faster than usual. And then you sent me, I said, the words bitter on my tongue. We needed coverage for fire season, and the entity never takes people in close succession. There should have been time, she replied, her voice hollow. Daniel paced the small office, his frustration palpable. This is insane, criminal. It's necessary, Valeria insisted, though her conviction wavered. The alternative is leaving that entire sector vulnerable to wildfires that could destroy thousands of acres, threaten communities. I want all the records, I said, my voice firm. Everything you have on this entity, what it is, how it operates, what happens to the people it takes. Valeria looked at me for a long moment, then stood and walked to a painting on her wall, swinging it aside to reveal a small safe. After entering the combination, she pulled out an old leather portfolio tied with string and placed it on the desk between us. Everything we know is here, she said, her voice heavy. Reports, witness accounts, research attempts. But it won't help you stop it. Why not? Daniel asked, his tone sharp. Because no one ever has, she replied, pushing the portfolio toward me. In 90 years, the Forest Service has tried everything. Religious ceremonies, technology, armed guards. Nothing works. It's part of that place now. I untied the string and opened the portfolio, revealing dozens of documents, photographs, and handwritten accounts spanning decades. On top was a black and white photograph from the 1950s, showing a tall, skinny fire lookout standing proudly in front of Tower 5. His face circled in red ink. Written on the back, James Harmon. Disappeared June 12, 1953. What happens to them? I asked, looking up at Valeria, my voice barely above a whisper. The people it takes. She shook her head, her expression grim. We don't know. There are theories. Some think they're dead, others think they're somewhere else. The entity seems to retain their memories, their voices. Beyond that, she trailed off, the silence heavy with unspoken horrors. We're going back, I said, gathering the portfolio and standing, my resolve hardening, to Tower 5. That's not advisable, Valeria said quickly, her voice tinged with alarm. Not until we understand what triggered its recent activity. You've had 90 years to understand, Daniel said, his tone cold. It's our turn now. Valeria looked between us, then sighed, her shoulders slumping in resignation. I can't stop you, but I'm coming with you. Why would you do that? I asked, surprised by her sudden shift. Because I've sent 17 people to Tower 5 during my tenure, she said, her voice steady but her eyes haunted. For never came back. I owe them this much. I nodded, tucking the portfolio under my arm. We leave tomorrow morning, I said, turning to go. As we reached the door, Valeria called after us, her voice a quiet warning. Roger, Daniel, whatever you think of me, of the Forest Service, we never understood what we were dealing with. Still don't. Be careful what you go looking for up there. We're not looking for it, I replied, my hand on the door handle. It's already found us. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows as we returned to Tower 5 the next morning. The air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, the silence unnaturally heavy. Valeria, Daniel, and I moved methodically through the tower, checking every inch of the structure. Drawers, furniture, walls, for anything that might shed light on the entity haunting this place. The tower creaked around us, swaying in the wind that had picked up since our arrival. Its groans a mournful chorus that seemed to echo the voices I'd heard in the night. 3 hours in, I pried at a loose floorboard with my pocket knife, working the blade into the crack where the wood had warped, my hands steady despite the tension coiling in my chest. Daniel crouched beside me, his flashlight beam illuminating the warped wood, while Valeria stood back, arms crossed, watching us tear apart government property without protest. Got it? I said as the board popped free with a groan, revealing a dark space beneath. I reached in and pulled out a small metal box, its surface scratched and dented, the kind you'd use to keep cash or valuables, with a simple latch on the front, unlocked. Someone didn't want this found, I said, setting it on the floor between us, the tower's creaking growing louder, as if protesting the intrusion. Open it, Daniel urged, his voice tight with anticipation. I flipped the latch and lifted the lid, revealing a leather-bound journal, its edges worn smooth from handling. The name Catherine Winters, Tower 5, 1972 written in faded ink on the first page. "Catherine Winters," Valeria said from behind us, her voice soft, almost reverent. "She was before my time." I flipped through the first few pages, the entries, standard lookout observations, weather patterns, wildlife sightings, maintenance notes, until page 23, where the handwriting changed, becoming tighter, more urgent. "Day 37, I read aloud, my voice echoing in the small space. "Something is watching the tower. I've seen it 3 nights in a row now, standing at the tree line. When I shine my light, it's gone." Daniel sat back on his heels, his expression darkening. "Just like Paul," he said, his voice low. I continued reading, skimming through entries that documented increasingly strange occurrences. Whispers in the wind, objects moved when Catherine wasn't looking, cold spots that appeared and disappeared without explanation. Day 45, I read, my voice steady despite the chill creeping up my spine. "It came closer last night, stood at the base of the tower for hours. I could hear it breathing. When I called out, it answered in my mother's voice." Valeria moved closer, her eyes wide. "What else?" I turned the page, Catherine's notes becoming more organized, as if she'd shifted from fear to determination. "She figured it out," I said, looking up at them, my voice tinged with awe. "Listen to this. It only comes when I'm alone." When Ranger Davis visited with supplies, nothing happened for 3 days after. It waits for isolation. Daniel took the journal from my hands, flipping through the pages, his voice growing more strained with each entry. "She's documenting its hunting pattern," he said, his eyes scanning the text. Day 52. I tested my theory today, kept the radio on all day, talking to base camp every hour. It stayed away until I fell asleep and the radio went silent. Woke to find it standing over my bed. Not a shadow anymore. It had taken shape. It looked like my brother Tom, but wrong somehow. Its eyes were empty. The 3 of us sat in silence, the wind outside growing stronger, whistling through the gaps in the tower's wood. A haunting melody that seemed to underscore Catherine's words. "It feeds on disconnection," I said finally, the realization settling like a stone in my chest. "The perfect trap for fire lookouts. Isolation is part of the job," Valeria said quietly, her voice heavy with guilt. "Always has been." Daniel continued reading, his voice strained as Catherine's entries grew more desperate, documenting her attempts to keep the entity at bay. Staying awake, keeping lights on, maintaining constant radio contact. The last entries were chaotic, the handwriting messy, words trailing off mid-sentence. Day 60, Daniel read, his voice trembling. "I'm leaving tomorrow. Can't stay here anymore. It's getting stronger, more persistent. I've packed my gear, but it knows. Saw it watching me from the trees when I tested my route. It's never come out in daylight before." He turned the page, the final entry dated the following morning. The words a jagged scrawl across the page. "It's waiting in the trees. Every path down. The radio's dead. No one's coming. It's so cold now. So cold." The final words trailed off. The ink smudged as if her hand had slipped. Daniel closed the journal carefully, his voice hollow. "She never made it out." "No," Valeria confirmed, her tone heavy. "Her official status is presumed wilderness accident, like all the others." I stood, the tower suddenly feeling too small, too exposed, the windows framing a forest that seemed to close in around us as darkness settled over the ridge. "You knew," I said, turning to Valeria, my voice sharp with accusation. "Maybe not about Catherine specifically, but you knew what happens here, and you kept sending people anyway." She didn't flinch, her gaze steady but her eyes haunted. "We needed the coverage area, and the pattern suggested it claims someone only every few years. So you played the odds," Daniel said, disgust evident in his voice. "With people's lives. With volunteers," she corrected, her voice firm but strained. "No one is forced to take Tower 5. No one is warned either," I countered, the anger rising in my chest. Valeria walked to the window, looking out at the darkening forest, her voice softening. "What would you have me do?" Tell recruits that some ancient monster haunts one of our fire towers? That it might take them if they're alone too long? Who would believe that? Paul did, I said, the weight of his video heavy in my pocket. He figured it out just like Catherine. That's why he hid the USB drive. Daniel joined Valeria at the window, his voice firm. We need to get this journal back to headquarters. Add it to the evidence. We're not leaving tonight, I said, checking my watch. The sky outside already a deep indigo, the forest a sea of shadows. It's too dark already. We'd be hiking blind. Valeria turned from the window, her expression grim. The thing doesn't attack groups. Catherine's notes back up what we've seen over the years. As long as we stick together, we should be okay till morning. Should be, Daniel repeated flatly, his skepticism mirroring my own. I pulled 3 sleeping bags from our packs and laid them out in the center of the room. Away from the windows, the towers creaking, a constant reminder of our vulnerability. We sleep in shifts, I said, my voice firm. 1 person awake at all times. I'll take first watch. Daniel offered to take the second shift, settling into the lookout chair with a flashlight and radio beside him, while Valeria took the sleeping bag nearest the door. I positioned mine where I could see all the windows, the darkness outside a canvas of unseen threats. I didn't expect to sleep, but exhaustion pulled me under almost immediately, my body surrendering to the weight of the day. Daniel's urgent whisper woke me, his voice cutting through the fog of sleep. Roger, wake up. I sat up instantly, alert, my heart pounding as I scanned the room. What is it? I asked, my voice hoarse. Listen, he said, his flashlight beam trembling slightly in his hand. At first, I heard nothing but the wind, a low moan that seemed to seep through the tower's walls. Then it came, a chorus of whispers, dozens of voices calling our names, not from inside the tower but from outside, from the darkness beyond the windows. Roger, Daniel, Valeria. The voices overlapped, some loud, some barely audible, a cacophony of men, women, and children, all beckoning us into the night. Valeria was awake now, her face pale in the beam of Daniel's flashlight, her eyes wide with fear. What time is it? I asked, checking my watch. Just after 2 a.m., the witching hour when Paul had said the entity was most active. Daniel handed me the binoculars, his voice tight. Look at the tree line. I moved to the window, careful to stay back from the glass, and peered through the binoculars, my breath catching as I spotted them. Dark figures stood still between the trees, their shapes not quite human, more like absences of light against the darkness, their outlines wavering like heat mirages. At least a dozen, maybe more, I said, counting silently, my voice steady despite the terror clawing at my chest. They've never come in these numbers before, Valeria said, her professional tone cracking, a tremor of fear breaking through. They know we're on to them, I said, lowering the binoculars, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. I could pick out individual voices now. Paul's hollow call, a woman's soft plea that might have been Catherine, others I didn't recognize. Join us, they said, their voices a chilling chorus. So cold here. Join us. Daniel grabbed his pack, his movements frantic. We need to barricade the doors. We worked quickly, pushing the heavy metal desk against the trap door that led to the stairs, wedging chairs under the doorknobs of the exterior door, the voices outside rising and falling like a tide, louder than quieter, over and over. Catherine was right, I said, checking the last window latch, my breath fogging in the frigid air. It feeds on isolation, but it's more than that. It collects people, keeps them somehow, or what's left of them. All these years, we thought they were just gone. Dead? Valeria said, clutching Catherine's journal, her voice trembling. But they're still here, aren't they? Still conscious in some way. I looked out at the figures again, their numbers growing, their shapes more defined against the darkness. They hadn't moved closer, but they hadn't retreated either, their presence a constant threat, their whispers a siren call to the void. We stay together, I said firmly, my voice cutting through the rising panic. No matter what happens, no one goes anywhere alone. That's how it gets you. Daniel nodded, his jaw tight. Together. Valeria joined us at the window, her expression resolute despite the fear in her eyes. Together. Outside, the dark figures stood vigil, their whispers carried on the wind, calling our names in a relentless chant that echoed through the night. The tower felt like a cage, its walls too thin, its windows too exposed, the forest beyond a realm of shadows and terror that stretched into the unknown. The investigation deepens, anomalous phenomena division. At first light, the forest remained cloaked in an unnatural silence, the absence of birdsong and insect hum a lingering reminder of the night's horrors. I set the last sensor in place, tightening the mounting bracket against the weathered wood of Tower 5's north support beam, the device blinking green, then red, then settling into a steady amber pulse that matched the rhythm of the others we'd placed around the perimeter. That's the last one, I called down to Thomas Bailey, who stood below with a tablet, his fingers moving quickly across the screen as he checked the incoming data streams. He nodded without looking up, his voice calm but focused. Signals clean. We've got full coverage now. I climbed down the ladder, my boots hitting the packed dirt with a thud that seemed too loud in the morning quiet. The forest around us a sea of stillness that made the hair on my neck stand up. Thomas and his team had arrived at dawn, their 2 Forest Service trucks loaded with more gear than I'd seen outside a research station. They weren't standard rangers. Their dark green field clothes bore a patch I'd never seen before. A stylized eye inside a triangle with the words Anomalous Phenomena Division curved beneath it. How long have you been with the Forest Service? I asked Thomas as we walked back toward the tower, my curiosity piqued by the unfamiliar insignia. Officially, 12 years, he replied, tucking the tablet under his arm, his tone matter of fact. But the division's been around since 1947. And you what? Chase ghosts through national parks? I asked, half joking, but his expression remained serious, his eyes scanning the tree line. We document and investigate phenomena that fall outside standard classification, things that affect Forest Service personnel or operations, like whatever's in Tower 5. Inside, Daniel and 2 others from Thomas's team, Lynn and Erickson, were setting up a small command center, transforming the tower's main room into a hub of blinking monitors, sensors, and cameras. The table where lookouts normally tracked smoke patterns and weather changes was now covered with equipment I couldn't name, its surfaces a tangle of wires and glowing screens. Valeria stood by the window, arms crossed, watching them work with a tight expression, her professional demeanor strained by the events of the past 24 hours. When she saw us enter, she motioned me over, her voice low. Did Bailey tell you they've been here before? I glanced at Thomas, who was now helping Lynn calibrate a device with too many dials, his movements precise and focused. No. When? I asked, my voice matching her quiet tone. 1986, she replied, her eyes narrowing. After 3 disappearances in 5 years, they spent 2 weeks setting up equipment not unlike this and left with no explanation. Their report was classified above my clearance level. And you didn't think to mention this earlier? I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. She met my gaze, her expression unyielding. I didn't know they were coming today. Someone higher up must have seen our access to the Tower 5 files. Before I could press her further, Daniel called us over, Catherine's journal open on a clear spot at the end of the table. I've been going through this with Lynn, he said, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. Catherine documented temperature drops before each appearance, sometimes as much as 15 degrees in minutes. Lynn nodded, leaning over the journal, her tone clinical. This matches what we've seen at other sites. Whatever this thing is, it makes everything around it cold when it manifests. Other sites? I asked, my interest piqued, the implications chilling. There are more places like this, Thomas said, joining us, setting his tablet down with a soft thud. We've documented 17 locations across North America with similar patterns. Remote places, usually with some historical significance, where the boundary between realities thins. Thin places, I said, recalling Valeria's earlier words about the indigenous warnings, the concept settling like a weight in my chest. That's one term, yes, Thomas replied, picking up Catherine's journal with careful reverence. May I? I nodded, and he began flipping through it, stopping occasionally to take pictures of certain pages with his phone. This is incredible documentation, he said, his voice tinged with admiration. Most witnesses don't maintain this level of detail as the phenomenon progresses. She was trying to understand it, Daniel said, his voice soft but firm, to survive it. But she didn't, Valeria added quietly, her eyes fixed on the journal, the weight of her guilt palpable. Thomas closed the journal, his expression serious. We should review the video evidence as well. I set up my laptop and played Paul's recording, the team watching in complete silence, their faces devoid of the shock or surprise I'd expected. When it ended, Erickson began taking notes, while Lynn pulled up comparison images on her tablet, her voice clinical. Movement pattern matches the Michigan Lighthouse entity, she said to Thomas. Same fluid transitions between forms. Vocal characteristics are consistent, too, Erickson added, his pen moving quickly across his notepad. Multiple overlapping sources. Emphasis on temperature references. Thomas turned to me, his gaze piercing. Has it spoken to you directly? Yes, I said, the memory of that hollow voice still fresh, sending a shiver down my spine. It used Paul's voice, said it was cold, asked me to join them in Tower 5. Them, Thomas repeated, his tone thoughtful. Plural. It's collective. Like the others, Lynn said, her words confirming something they already knew, though the implications made my stomach churn. What does that mean, collective? Daniel asked, his voice tight with unease. Thomas paused, glancing at his team before answering, his tone careful. From what we've figured out, these entities aren't single beings. They're made up of those they've taken, their consciousness preserved, at least partially. The thought of Paul, of all 27 people taken from Tower 5, trapped for decades, centuries even, made my stomach turn, a wave of nausea rising in my throat. All of them, Valeria asked, sinking into a chair, her voice trembling. For how long? We don't know, Thomas admitted, his expression grim. But the oldest entity we've documented has been active since at least the 1700s, based on historical records. I walked to the window, needing space, the forest outside a sea of shadows that seemed to pulse with unseen life, the weight of Thomas's words pressing down on me. We need to get back to work, he said behind me, his voice steady but urgent. We have a lot to set up before nightfall. For the next few hours, we helped Thomas's team prepare, setting up monitoring stations around and inside the tower, cameras with thermal and night vision, audio recorders designed to pick up infrasound, sensors tracking everything from air pressure to electromagnetic changes. While helping Erickson run cable along the tower's upper level, Daniel called down to me, his voice urgent. Roger, you need to see this. I climbed up to find him kneeling beside a small hatch in the ceiling that led to a cramped attic space. Insulation pushed aside to reveal a metal box similar to the one that had held Catherine's journal, but larger. It was wedged between the rafters, he said, pulling it out. We brought it down to the main level, Thomas producing a set of small tools from his pack and opening the locked box in seconds. Inside lay personal items, carefully arranged. A man's wristwatch with a cracked face stopped at 317. A woman's silver ring with a small blue stone. A leather wallet worn and stained. A pocket knife with initials carved into the handle. A pair of wire-rimmed glasses with one lens missing. Belongings of the missing, Valeria said softly, her voice heavy with sorrow. Why are they here? I asked, reaching for the watch, but Thomas caught my wrist, his grip firm. Careful, he warned, his tone serious. Physical contact with these objects can trigger psychometric responses. Meaning what? Daniel asked, his brow furrowing. Visions, memories, not yours, Thomas replied, pulling a pair of latex gloves from his pocket and handing them to me. These should buffer the effect, but be prepared. I pulled on the gloves and picked up the watch, the metal cold against my skin. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a chill ran from my fingers up my arm, and the tower around me blurred. I was standing in the same spot, but it was night, Rain hammering the windows, the air frigid. A man I didn't know paced back and forth, checking his watch obsessively, his breath visible in the cold air. Outside, something dark pressed against the glass, its form indistinct but menacing, a void that seemed to absorb the light. The man backed away, his breath hitching, and the watch face cracked as he fell. A scream caught in his throat. Then I was back, the watch heavy in my gloved hand, Daniel gripping my shoulder, his face etched with worry. "You okay? You zoned out for a second there." "I saw him," I said, setting the watch down carefully, my voice trembling. "The owner, the night it took him." Thomas nodded, his expression unsurprised. "Memory transfer. These objects pick up impressions from traumatic moments." "You knew about this?" Valeria asked sharply, her voice cutting through the tension. "We found similar collections at 3 other sites," Thomas said, his tone clinical. "We believe the entity leaves them as anchors, connection points to those it's taken, or perhaps trophies." "Trophies?" Daniel muttered, his voice laced with disgust. Lynn approached with a scanner, running it over the items, her voice steady. "Strong electromagnetic signatures on all of them. They're still active." "Active?" I asked, my stomach twisting. "Connected to the entity," Thomas explained. "It maintains links to these objects, possibly uses them to help manifest in our reality." Valeria stepped forward, her voice sharp. "There was another collection found in 1986. Your division took them." Thomas looked surprised, his brow furrowing. "I wasn't aware of that. Those items aren't in our current archives." "Then where are they?" Daniel asked, but no one had an answer, the question hanging in the air like a specter. As afternoon turned to evening, we finalized our plan. The air growing colder with each passing hour, the forest outside sinking into a deep, unnatural silence. Based on Catherine's journal and the patterns Thomas's team had recorded, the entity was most active between 2 and 4 a.m., targeting those who were alone. "So we don't let Roger be isolated," Daniel said firmly, his voice steady. "I'll stay at Tower 4 with a radio, maintaining constant contact all night." Tower 4 was 3 miles away on the next ridge, close enough for radio contact but outside the entity's range of influence. "The entity will try to disrupt communication," Thomas warned, his tone serious. "It always does." "Then we have backups," I said, checking the multiple radios and frequencies we'd prepared. "My team will monitor from the base camp half a mile down the access road," Thomas added, "close enough to record data, far enough to maintain objectivity." Valeria stepped forward, her expression resolute. "And I'll coordinate between the teams." I looked at her, surprised by her decision. "You're staying?" "I've sent too many people into this situation blind," she said, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine determination. "I need to see this through." As sunset approached, the temperature dropped sharply, our breath fogging in the frigid air, the monitoring equipment showing anomalies. Strange electromagnetic readings, static on the radios, cameras losing focus for seconds at a time. Thomas studied his instruments, his expression grim. "It knows we're here. It knows what we're doing." "Good," I said, checking the radio that would connect me to Daniel, my voice firm. "Let it know we're fighting back." Daniel left for Tower 4 with 2 radios and emergency flares, while Thomas's team packed up their mobile equipment and headed to the base camp, leaving the automated systems running in Tower 5. Before they left, Thomas handed me a small device that looked like a modified flashlight, its surface etched with unfamiliar symbols. "This emits a focused electromagnetic pulse," he explained. "It won't stop the entity, but it might disrupt it temporarily if it gets too close." "Thanks," I said, tucking it into my belt, the weight of it a small comfort. "Remember," Thomas added, his voice serious, "maintain connection. That's your best defense. As long as you're communicating with others, you're not truly isolated." Soon, it was just Valeria and me in the tower, surrounded by blinking equipment, the forest outside a sea of darkness that seemed to pulse with unseen life. She would leave for the base camp in an hour, after we'd established solid communication protocols with Daniel. "You don't have to do this," she said as we checked the radio connections, her voice soft but earnest. "We could abort, try again with more preparation. It would just mean someone else facing this later," I said, my resolve unwavering. "Besides, I've got unfinished business with whatever's out there." The radio crackled, and Daniel's voice came through, clear and steady. "Tower 4 to Tower 5, radio check, over." I picked up the handset, my breath fogging in the increasingly frigid air. "Tower 5 receiving. Signal's good. All quiet here so far," Daniel reported. "How's it looking there?" I glanced out the windows at the darkening forest, the temperature inside the tower dropping another 5 degrees in the last 20 minutes. "Getting colder," I said, my voice steady despite the unease creeping up my spine. "But we're ready." Valeria checked her watch, her expression tense. "I should head to base camp before it gets any darker." I walked her to the door, the towers creaking a constant reminder of our vulnerability. "Be careful out there," I said, my voice low. She paused, hand on the doorknob, her voice soft but heavy with regret. "Roger, I'm sorry for all of this, for Paul." "I know," I said, meeting her gaze. "Now go help us figure out how to end it." After she left, I locked the door and checked all the windows, the monitoring equipment humming around me, its lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. I sat in the lookout chair, Catherine's journal open beside me, the radio close at hand, the forest outside dead quiet, the silence a palpable weight. "Tower 5 to Tower 4, I said into the handset, my breath fogging in the frigid air. "Still with me, Daniel?" His voice came back immediately, a lifeline in the darkness. "Right here, Roger. Not going anywhere." I keyed the radio again, the temperature dropping another 8 degrees in the last 5 minutes, the monitors showing wild fluctuations, electromagnetic field spiking, air pressure dropping, audio sensors picking up infrasound just below human hearing. "Tower 5 to Tower 4, radio check," I said, my voice steady despite the hair on my arms standing on end, the cold seeping into my bones. "Tower 4 receiving," Daniel replied, his voice a steady anchor. "Everything okay?" "Temperature's dropping fast," I said, checking the monitors, the readings going haywire. Electromagnetic field spiking, air pressure dropping, audio sensors picking up sounds just below what we can hear. "Keep talking to me," Daniel urged, his voice firm. "What are the readings showing?" I described the numbers scrolling across the screens, focusing on the concrete facts, anything to keep my mind anchored as the tower grew colder, the air heavy with an unseen presence. "Tower 5 to base camp," I said into the second radio, my voice steady despite the growing dread. "You getting all this?" Thomas's voice crackled through, less clear than Daniel's but audible. "Confirmed. We're recording significant anomalies across all channels. Stay connected, Roger." I moved to the window, keeping the radio in hand, the forest beyond the clearing dark and still, but not empty. The feeling of being watched had returned, stronger now, a primal instinct that told me something was coming. "I think it's coming," I said to Daniel, my voice low. "Something's different tonight. It knows we're waiting for it." The clock ticked over to 2:17 a.m., and the lights in the tower flickered, a sudden hiss of static erupting from the radios. Through the noise, I heard them, whispers, dozens of voices overlapping, a chilling chorus that seemed to seep through the walls. Outside, at the edge of the trees, dark figures began to emerge, not one or two but dozens, their shapes black against the night, moving with the same fluid, wrong motion I'd seen in Paul's video. "They're coming out of the forest," I said, keeping my voice steady with effort. "I count at least 20, maybe more." "What do they look like?" Thomas asked through the crackling radio. "Not quite human," I said, searching for words. "More like human-shaped holes in the world." The figures moved toward the tower, spreading out around it, their movements gliding, leaving no footprints on the ground, the temperature dropping another 10 degrees. My hands trembling as I reported what I saw. Behind me, the air shifted, a density forming that hadn't been there before, a pressure that made my ears pop. I turned slowly, already knowing what I'd find. It was in the middle of the room, despite the locked doors and windows, no longer a shadow but something solid, its form shifting, never holding one shape for more than a few seconds. I saw Paul's face, then it melted away, replaced by others. A woman with empty eyes who might have been Catherine, an older man with a beard, a young girl. Faces from different times, different lives, all blending together in a grotesque parade. "It's inside," I said into the radio, backing toward the window, my voice trembling. "It got through the locked door somehow." "What's it doing?" Daniel asked, his voice tight with tension. "Just standing there, changing faces," I replied, the entity tilting its head, its eyes shifting color and shape, watching me with an ancient hunger. When it spoke, the sound came from everywhere at once. A chorus of voices. Men, women, young, old. All speaking together. "We are so cold, Roger," it said, the words a chilling harmony. "Join us." I kept the radio pressed to my mouth, my voice steady despite the terror clawing at my chest. "It's talking to me, using multiple voices at once," I reported, the entity stepping closer, its body wavering, the air around it twisting like a heat mirage. "Keep talking to us," Thomas urged through the static, his voice a lifeline. "Don't engage with it directly." But the entity spoke again, its voices a discordant symphony. "You don't belong here," it said, the words echoing through the tower. "This is our place, our tower." "I'm not leaving," I told Daniel and Thomas, though I knew the entity could hear me, my voice firm. "I'm staying connected." The thing that sometimes wore Paul's face moved closer, the air rippling around it, its presence suffocating. "They always leave you, Roger," it said, Paul's voice rising above the others momentarily, the words cutting deep, unearthing memories I'd buried long ago. "Everyone leaves in the end." I felt sick, the entity's knowledge of my past a violation, its words a weapon designed to isolate me. "It's trying to get in my head," I reported, forcing myself to keep talking, "saying things about me." "That's how it works," Thomas said, his voice fighting through the static. "It finds the isolation already inside you and amplifies it." The entity's body bulged and stretched, growing taller until it nearly touched the ceiling, its form grotesque, a nightmare made manifest. "Daniel will leave too," it said, now using my mother's voice, the same tone she'd used when she told me my father wasn't coming back, the memory a raw wound. "Everyone does. You'll be alone again." I gripped the radio tighter, my voice trembling but resolute. "Daniel, you still there?" "Right here, Roger," he replied immediately, his voice a steady anchor. "Not going anywhere." The entity hissed, its body shrinking slightly at Daniel's voice, the reaction immediate and telling. "Interesting," I said, my voice steadier now. "I think it doesn't like when we communicate. It reacted when you spoke." Outside, the dark figures had reached the base of the tower, circling it slowly, their movements growing more agitated. Their not-quite faces turned upward, watching me through the windows. "They're surrounding the tower," I reported, my voice steady despite the rising panic. Moving faster now, the entity inside shifted again, its form stabilizing into a near-perfect replica of Paul, but wrong in subtle ways. The eyes too wide, the mouth too slack, the proportions just off enough to be uncanny. "We need you," it said, using only Paul's voice now, the tone pleading, desperate. "It's so cold where we are, so empty." "Where are you?" I asked before I could stop myself, the question slipping out, my curiosity overriding Thomas's warning. "Roger, don't engage," Thomas said through the static, but the entity answered, stretching one arm toward me, the limb elongating impossibly, reaching across the room while its feet remained rooted. "Between," the voices said together, a chilling harmony. "Not here, not there. Between." I backed away until I hit the wall, my voice trembling as I reported. "It says they're between, not here or there." "Fascinating," Thomas murmured, his voice distant through the static. "A liminal space, perhaps, or..." The radio cut out completely, leaving only harsh static, the entity rushing toward me, spreading across the floor and up the walls like a living shadow. The temperature dropped so fast my ears popped. Frost forming on the windows in delicate, intricate patterns, the air frigid enough to burn my lungs. I fumbled with the second radio, trying different channels, but there was nothing but static, the entity blocking all communication. "Nice try," I said aloud, reaching for the satellite phone Thomas had left as a backup. Its technology different from the radios, a last line of defense. The entity pulled back slightly as I turned it on, the connection taking agonizing seconds to establish. But then Thomas's voice came through, faint but clear. "Roger, we lost radio contact. It's blocking the radios," I said quickly, my voice trembling. "But the satellite phone works. Put it on speaker," Thomas instructed, his voice steady. "Keep the connection open." I placed the phone on the table, Daniel's voice joining in, a lifeline in the chaos. "Roger, you okay?" "Still here," I confirmed, the entity pulling back further, its form wavering as the connection held. "It doesn't seem to like this connection either." The darkness coalesced into a more human shape, its eyes, Paul's eyes, but ancient and hungry, watching me with a predatory intensity. "We've been alone so long," it said, the voices now discordant, some whispering, some nearly shouting. "Decades, centuries. How many are you?" I asked, ignoring Thomas's earlier warning, my need to understand overriding my fear. The entity's body shook, its form trembling. "Many," it said, the voices a chaotic chorus. "Everyone who came before us, everyone who was forgotten." "We haven't forgotten," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the terror coursing through me. "We know your names." I reached for Catherine's journal, flipping to the Forest Service records Valeria had shown us, the names of the victims a litany of remembrance. Paul Lee, Catherine Winters. I began, and with each name, the entity twitched, its form destabilizing, the voices splitting apart, no longer speaking in unison. Robert Gaines, 1954. Maria Suarez, 1967. John Whitaker, 1932. The entity commanded, "Stop." Its voices a discordant scream, but I could hear individual voices breaking through. Scared, confused, angry, fighting against the collective. "They respond to recognition," I told Thomas and Daniel, my voice steady. "Like it weakens whatever hold the entity has on them." For hours, the standoff continued, the entity shifting tactics. Threatening, begging, sometimes standing silently, its gaze a weight I couldn't escape. I kept talking to Daniel and Thomas, describing everything I saw, maintaining the connection that seemed to weaken it, even as it tried to disrupt our communication. Outside, the dark figures circled the tower all night, their movements growing more erratic as morning approached, the entity inside fading, its form less solid, the voices more disjointed. "The sun's coming up," Daniel reported from Tower 4, his voice a welcome relief. "First light on the horizon." As if hearing him, the entity retreated to the center of the room, the temperature rising slowly, the frost melting from the windows, its form growing transparent. "It's pulling back," I said, watching as it shrank, barely larger than a human now. For a moment, it wore Paul's face one last time, but the expression was different. Less menacing, more confused, almost pleading. "Cold?" it whispered, the voice solely Paul's, a single, desperate plea. "Help us." Then it was gone, the dark figures outside retreating to the trees as the sun rose, their forms dissolving into the morning light. I dropped into the chair, exhaustion crashing over me, my voice hoarse from hours of talking. "It's gone," I said, my voice trembling with relief. "They're all gone." "You did it," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "You made it through the night." Thomas was already analyzing the data, his voice excited. The equipment caught everything, clear footage of the entity changing forms, electromagnetic readings off the charts. "This is documentation like we've never seen before." I stared at the spot where the entity had stood, Paul's final plea echoing in my mind. "It wasn't just trying to take me," I said slowly, the realization dawning. It was asking for help. Daniel arrived first, taking the stairs 2 at a time, his eyes wide as he surveyed the room. The temperature readings from the night showing below freezing conditions that had left a lingering chill in the air. "Jesus, Roger," he said, crossing the room to grip my shoulder, his voice thick with concern. "You okay?" "Yeah, just tired," I replied, my voice rough from the night's ordeal. "Thanks for staying on the line all night. That's what partners do," he said, a faint smile breaking through his worry. Thomas and his team arrived minutes later, their excitement palpable as they pulled data from the equipment, their voices a buzz of activity. "This changes everything," Thomas said, reviewing the footage, the entity's shifting forms captured in stark detail on infrared, its impossible movements tracked by motion sensors. Valeria joined us mid-morning, her expression one of relief as she saw I was unharmed, her voice steady as she delivered the news. "The regional director's been briefed," she said. "They're implementing new protocols for Tower 5, effective immediately, 2-person minimum staffing at all times, permanent monitoring equipment, an emergency beacon system, and full cooperation with the Anomalous Phenomena Division going forward." Thomas called us over to review the footage he'd compiled, the entity's movements a haunting dance across the screens. Regular video, thermal imaging, electromagnetic readings all capturing its otherworldly presence. "Based on these readings," Thomas explained, his voice steady, "I believe the entity exists in a quantum state, somewhere between our reality and another dimension. It's not fully here, which is why it needs to draw energy from its surroundings to manifest." "And the people it takes?" Daniel asked, his voice low, the question heavy with implication. "Where do they go?" Thomas's expression grew serious, his voice careful. "That's the question, isn't it? Their consciousness seems to be preserved within the entity somehow, but whether they still exist as individuals or have been absorbed into a collective, we just don't know." I remembered the entity's words between "not here, not there," the concept chilling in its ambiguity. "There's something else," I said, pulling up the footage from different camera angles. "Watch what happens when I start naming the victims." We reviewed the sequence, the entity's form destabilizing with each name, its hold weakening under the weight of recognition. "It weakens under direct recognition," Thomas observed, his voice thoughtful. "Being seen, truly seen, disrupts its hold somehow. Not just physical observation," I added, the realization dawning, "but being acknowledged, remembered." Thomas nodded slowly, his expression serious. "That fits with our limited data from other sites. These entities feed on isolation and anonymity. Being forgotten strengthens them. Being remembered weakens their grip." Lynn joined us with a tablet, her voice steady as she presented the thermal readings from the night. "Look at these," she said, the screen showing heat signatures across the tower, the entity appearing not as a cold spot but as a void, an absence in the thermal spectrum. "It doesn't register as cold," she explained. "It registers as nothing, like that space doesn't exist in our reality." "So what do we do with all this?" Daniel asked, leaning against the table, his voice heavy. "How do we stop it?" "We can contain it," Thomas said, his tone confident. "The new protocols will help, 2-person teams, constant monitoring, regular communication. The entity seems unable to take people who stay connected to each other. But destroying it?" I pressed the question a weight on my chest. Thomas exchanged glances with Lynn before answering, his voice careful. "That might be impossible without understanding where these people go when taken. And if their consciousness still exists within the entity, destroying it might destroy them too." The possibility hit us hard, the thought of 27 people from Tower 5 alone, possibly still conscious, still aware, trapped in that liminal space. Too heavy to bear. As Thomas's team packed up their equipment, I stood at the window, looking out at the now peaceful forest, a bird landing on a branch at the edge of the clearing, the first sign of life I'd seen near Tower 5 since arriving. Somewhere in those trees, the entity waited, weakened but patient, its hunger an ancient force that had outlasted generations. 6 months later, I followed a trail marker deeper into the brush, pushing aside branches that snagged at my jacket, the forest around Tower 5 still feeling wrong. too quiet in some places, too noisy in others, a dissonance that set my nerves on edge. The radio at my hip crackled, Daniel's voice breaking through the silence. "Roger, you're getting close to your boundary. Where are you?" I keyed the mic, my voice steady. "Found something odd. A trail marker that wasn't here before. A stone cairn with a red bandana. Recent. Definitely wasn't here during our last survey." "Hold position," Daniel replied quickly. "I'm coming to you." "Copy that," I said, stopping but keeping my eyes on the narrow game trail ahead. We'd been strict about the buddy system since establishing the containment zone around Tower 5. No one going anywhere alone, not even for a moment. 5 minutes later, Daniel emerged through the bushes, a sensor pack on his back, green lights blinking steadily. "There," I said, pointing to the small stack of flat stones. The faded red cloth tied around the top won a stark contrast against the muted greens and browns of the forest. "Someone's been here," Daniel said, his brow furrowing. "Could be hikers. This area isn't officially closed. Hikers don't usually come this far off trail," I replied, studying the ground around the cairn. "And look at how it's positioned," pointing directly at that rock face. We headed in the direction it indicated, moving carefully through the thick underbrush, the radio buzzing again as Martinez's voice came through. "Tower 5 to ground team, check-in time." Daniel responded, his voice steady. "Ground team here. We're investigating a possible trail marker about half a click east of sensor point 3. "Copy that," Martinez replied. "Stay on comms. Lee and Ramirez are finishing the north perimeter." We pushed through a stand of ferns and stopped short, the rock face ahead revealing a narrow opening cut into the stone, partly covered by hanging vines and moss. "That's not on any of our maps," Daniel said quietly, his voice tense. I pulled out my flashlight, the beam illuminating the entrance, revealing marks around the opening that looked too deliberate to be natural. "We should call this in," Daniel said, reaching for his radio, but I stopped him, my voice urgent. "Wait, look at this." I shone my light on the stone beside the entrance, revealing faint lines carved into the rock, human figures standing in a line, above them a formless darkness, and between them a triangle that resembled a mountain. "Holy," Daniel whispered, his voice trailing off as the implications sank in. The strange shape above the figures mirrored the entity we'd encountered, its form captured in simple stone carvings, a testament to its ancient presence. I keyed my radio, my voice steady. "Tower 5, this is Roger. We found something, a cave with what looks like pictographs on the walls. Request Thomas's team at our location." "Copy that," Martinez replied. "They're 20 minutes out. Maintain position and continue regular check-ins." Daniel began taking photos with his phone, his voice low. "These look old. Really old." "Yeah," I said, running my fingers lightly over the carved lines, feeling their depth in the stone. "And familiar." The shape above the human figures was unmistakable, its formless nature captured with eerie accuracy, a record of humanity's encounter with the entity millennia ago. Thomas arrived with Lynn and Martinez 20 minutes later, their equipment unfamiliar but clearly specialized, their eyes widening as they saw the pictographs. "Extraordinary," Thomas murmured, immediately setting up lights and scanning equipment, his voice tinged with awe. "These appear to be consistent with local indigenous art from the pre-contact period." Lynn photographed each section of the wall, her voice clinical. "The style matches artifacts dated between 1000 and 300 BCE. 3,000 years, I said, the weight of the timeline settling over me. "That's how long this thing's been taking people." Thomas nodded, his expression grim. "At least that long. Maybe longer." We spent the next hour documenting the site, Martinez coordinating with the other teams over the radio, ensuring no one lost contact, the air growing colder as the forest fell into an unnatural silence, the whispers of the wind rhying an eerie undertone. "I want to see inside," I said finally, my voice firm, the need to understand overriding my caution. Thomas hesitated, his brow furrowing. "We should set up proper archaeological protocols first. We're not here as archaeologists," I reminded him, my tone sharp. "We're here to understand what we're dealing with." After a brief discussion, we established a plan. Daniel and I would enter first with cameras and sensors, Thomas and Lynn monitoring from outside, maintaining constant radio contact, Martinez coordinating with the perimeter teams to ensure the containment grid remained active. The cave entrance was narrow but opened into a larger chamber 15 feet in, our flashlight beams cutting through the thick darkness, the air stale but dry with a faint mineral smell. "Look at the walls," Daniel whispered, his voice echoing in the confined space. Every surface was covered with pictographs, hundreds of them from floor to ceiling, some faded with age, others sharper, but none modern, their story spiraling clockwise around the room. "Tower 5 to cave team," Martinez's voice crackled through our radios. "Status check. We're inside," I reported, my voice steady. "The entire chamber is covered with pictographs. Sending video feed now." I turned on the body camera Thomas had given me, the footage streaming to the team outside as we moved slowly around the chamber. "These first images show people living near a mountain," Daniel narrated, his voice low. "Then something appears, the same formless shape we saw outside. The drawings depicted the entity emerging from the mountain during a celestial alignment. Stars and a crescent moon in a specific pattern, followed by scenes of people being taken, half swallowed by the darkness. There," I said, pointing to a more detailed section, my voice tinged with awe. "They're showing some kind of ritual." The pictographs depicted people standing in a circle, holding what looked like torches or sticks, with one figure in the center facing the entity, arms outstretched. They were trying to communicate with it. Thomas's voice came through the radio, his tone thoughtful. "Perhaps even control it or free those it had taken," I added, moving to the next section. The final sequence was harder to interpret, the circular pattern still present, but now lines connected the central figure to the entity, some of the taken figures appearing to return, their forms emerging from the darkness. "They found a way," I said quietly, the realization dawning. "They knew how to get people back." Daniel studied the images closely, his voice uncertain. "But did it work? Look at the last panel." The final pictograph showed the mountain alone, with neither people nor entity visible, just empty space where both had been. "The dating equipment is giving us preliminary results," Thomas's voice crackled through the radio. "The oldest images are approximately 3,200 years old, the newest at least 500 years old. So whatever happened here," Daniel said, his voice heavy, "it ended before European contact. Or they stopped recording it," I replied, running my hand along the final panel, feeling the ancient grooves in the stone, the weight of history pressing down on me. We spent another hour documenting the cave before emerging. The sun low in the sky, the temperature dropping noticeably, the forest around us a sea of shadows that seemed to watch our every move. "We need to finish the perimeter before dark," Martinez reminded us, her voice steady. "The sensors have to be calibrated as a complete circuit." Back at Tower 5, the remaining teams were installing.